When Evan Carter was 19, his parents told him to pack his things and leave. There was no argument that night, no dramatic shouting, no broken furniture. That almost made it worse. Evan stood in the hallway of the house, where he had grown up holding an old backpack, while his father stared at him with cold disappointment. "You're an adult now," his father said. "You need to learn how to survive on your own." Evan looked toward his mother, hoping she would say something. She didn't. Instead, she folded her arms and quietly said, "Your father is right." Evan swallowed the lump in his throat. "Where am I supposed to go?" His father shrugged. "Figure it out." Those 2 words stayed with Evan for years. He left that house with a backpack, a few clothes, his school, certificates, and $27. He didn't see his parents again. At first, life was brutal. Evan slept in a cheap rented room above an old mechanic shop. He worked during the day unloading trucks and washed dishes at night. Sometimes he ate once a day because he needed to save enough money for rent. There were nights when he sat on the edge of his bed and wondered what he had done wrong, but he refused to give up. Years passed. Evan slowly built a life for himself. He started a small construction company with 1 second-hand truck and a handful of tools. He worked harder than anyone around him, and eventually people began trusting him with bigger projects. By the time he was 32, Evan owned a successful renovation business. He had money now. He had a comfortable house. He had employees, but there was still one empty space in his life that money couldn't fill. His grandmother, Margaret Hale, had been the only person in his family who had always believed in him. Whenever Evan struggled as a teenager, Margaret would secretly slip money into his pocket and tell him, "One day you'll build a life nobody can take away from you." She had passed away while Evan was still young. He had attended her funeral alone. His parents had barely spoken to him. Then 12 years after he had been kicked out, Evan received a phone call from a lawyer. "Mr. Carter, I'm calling about your grandmother's estate." Evan sat silently. "I thought everything was settled years ago." "Not quite," the lawyer replied. "Your grandmother left instructions that we were not allowed to open one particular document until you turned 30. Evan frowned. "What document?" "A sealed letter." His heart suddenly began beating faster. "Does it have my name on it?" The lawyer paused. "Yes, it does." 2 days later, Evan arrived at the lawyer's office. On the desk was a small wooden box. His name was written across the envelope inside. "Evan Carter." His hands trembled as he opened it. The letter was short. "Evan, if you are reading this, then the time has come for you to know the truth. The mountain property was never meant to belong to your parents. I left it to the person who needed it most. You?" Evan stopped reading. The mountain property. He knew about the old family cabin. It had belonged to his grandmother for decades, but he had never thought much about it. The lawyer continued. "Your grandmother also left the property under specific conditions." "What conditions?" "You must live there for 30 days before you can legally decide what to do with it." Evan almost laughed. 30 days. Yes. Then the lawyer handed him another document. It contained the property details. The cabin was much larger than Evan remembered. It sat on several acres of mountain land, surrounded by forests and overlooking a beautiful valley. But there was something else. A note from Margaret. "Do not sell the cabin until you discover what is hidden beneath it." Evan stared at the sentence. "What does that mean?" The lawyer shook his head. "I honestly don't know." That evening, Evan drove toward the mountains. When he reached the cabin, he noticed something strange. There were fresh tire tracks in the mud. Someone had been there recently. Evan unlocked the door. Inside, everything looked untouched. Old furniture, dusty photographs, a fireplace, his grandmother's wooden rocking chair. Then he noticed something on the dining table. A folder? He opened it. Inside were architectural drawings of the property. Someone had planned major renovations. A new guest house, a swimming pool, a luxury driveway. At the bottom of the drawings was a signature. His father's. Evan stared at it in disbelief. Why would his father be planning renovations on a property that had supposedly belonged to Margaret? Then he found another document. It was a purchase agreement. His parents had already started negotiating with the developer. They were planning to sell the mountain property, and according to the paperwork, they believed they owned it. Evan's hands tightened around the papers. For 12 years his parents hadn't called. They hadn't asked if he was alive. They hadn't cared whether he was sleeping in a room above a mechanic's shop. But now they were trying to take the one thing his grandmother had left him. Suddenly, Evan heard a car approaching. Headlights appeared through the trees. A black SUV stopped outside the cabin. The driver's door opened. Evan recognized the man who stepped out immediately. His father, and behind him stood his mother. His father walked toward the cabin and stopped at the door. Evan didn't answer. His father looked at him with surprise. We need to talk. Evan held up the documents. I think we have a lot to talk about. His father looked at the papers. Then his expression changed. You opened the letter. Evan stared at him. You knew about the letter. His father remained silent. His mother stepped forward. Evan, please. You don't understand what your grandmother wanted. Evan looked between them. For 12 years you didn't want to explain anything. His father took a deep breath. Because we thought you would never come back. Evan's voice became quiet. You were right. He closed the door. But before he could lock it, his father said something that stopped him. Your grandmother didn't leave you the cabin because she loved you more. Evan slowly turned around. His father looked terrified. She left it to you because she knew what we had done. Evan froze. What did you do? His father looked at his wife. Neither of them answered. Then his mother whispered, We weren't the only people who knew your grandmother's secret. Evan stood completely still. For 12 years he had believed his parents had simply rejected him. Now he realized there had been something much bigger behind it. What secret? He asked. His father walked inside. We should have told you years ago. Evan laughed bitterly. You should have told me a lot of things. His father looked at the floor. Your grandmother discovered that someone was trying to steal the mountain property. Who? We never found out. Evan shook his head. That doesn't explain why you kicked me out. His mother finally spoke. Because your grandmother believed you were the only person in the family she could trust. Evan stared at her. She put the property in your name before she died, but she didn't tell anyone. His father continued. We discovered it later. We thought we could convince her to change the will, but she refused. Yes, and then his father sighed. She told us that if anything happened to her, you would receive everything. Evan suddenly understood. You were angry because of the inheritance. His mother looked ashamed. We were afraid. You were greedy. She didn't argue. Evan returned to the wooden table. What's underneath the cabin? His father looked toward the floor. That's what we never found. Evan remembered the letter. Do not sell the cabin until you discover what is hidden beneath it. He began searching. Behind an old bookshelf he found a small metal key. It opened a hidden compartment beneath the fireplace. Inside was an old journal. It belonged to Margaret. Evan opened the first page. The journal described years of financial records, property documents and conversations with a developer who had been trying to acquire the land. But near the end, Margaret had written something that shocked Evan. The land contained something more valuable than money. Evan continued reading. The final pages mentioned an underground spring beneath the property. The water was clean, naturally filtered, and unusually abundant. A company had discovered it years earlier and wanted control of the land. Margaret had refused to sell. She believed the spring should remain protected. But she had also discovered something else. The company had been using forged documents to claim ownership of part of the property. Margaret had gathered evidence. She had hidden everything beneath the cabin. Evan looked at his father. You knew? His father nodded. We knew about the company. We didn't know where she hid the evidence. Evan opened the journal again. A simple drawing showed the cabin floor. There was an X beneath the old bedroom. Evan grabbed a flashlight. They removed the wooden floorboards. After several minutes, Evan's shovel struck metal. Everyone became silent. They uncovered a steel box. Inside were original property deeds, financial records, photographs, and copies of legal documents. There was enough evidence to prove the land had been illegally targeted for years. But there was one final envelope. Evan opened it. Margaret had written, Evan, if you are holding this, remember one thing. I didn't leave you this land because you were perfect. I left it because you understood what it meant to lose everything. Evan's eyes filled with tears. The rest of the letter explained that Margaret had always known. What happened the night Evan was kicked out? She knew his parents had chosen money over their son. She had wanted Evan to build his own life first. She believed that if she gave him the property, too early his parents would use him to get it. So she waited. She protected the land. And she protected him. Evan looked at his parents. You knew she loved me. His mother began crying. Yes, and you still let me go? His father lowered his head. We were wrong. Evan stood silently for several seconds. Then he said, You were not wrong for one night, you were wrong for 12 years. Neither parent responded. The developer was eventually taken to court. The forged documents were exposed and the mountain property was legally confirmed as Evan's. But Evan didn't turn the cabin into a luxury resort. He remembered his grandmother's words. He renovated the old cabin and transformed part of the property into a small community retreat. Families who couldn't afford vacations could stay there for free. He also protected the natural spring and donated money toward environmental conservation. Months later, Evan found another letter hidden inside Margaret's old rocking chair. It contained only one sentence. Home isn't the place that refuses to let you leave. Home is the place that welcomes you when you return. Evan sat quietly beside the fireplace. For the first time in years, he didn't feel angry. He didn't need revenge. He didn't need an apology. He had something far more valuable. He had finally learned that being abandoned did not mean being worthless. His parents had once told him to figure out how to survive. He had built a life. He had found his purpose. And most importantly, he had become the kind of person his grandmother always believed he could be. As the sun disappeared behind the mountains, Evan looked through the window at the land Margaret had protected. Then he smiled. The family that had once thrown him away had taught him how to live without them, and the grandmother they had underestimated had quietly made sure he would never truly be alone.